The silver spoon clattered against fine china, the sound echoing through the cavernous dining room like a judge's gavel. Sophia Hartwell didn't flinch. She had learned long ago that flinching only made things worse. Instead, she kept her eyes fixed on the untouched plate of food in front of her, willing herself to become invisible, to fade into the damask wallpaper, to disappear entirely from her aunt's sight. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Aunt Constance sat at the head of the mahogany table, her skeletal fingers wrapped around a crystal wine glass, her lips pursed in perpetual disapproval. She was 53 years old but could pass for 40 with the right lighting and enough cosmetic intervention. Her home in Boston's Beacon Hill was a monument to old money and older grudges, every room decorated with antiques that cost more than most people earned in a year. Constance had married well twice, buried both husbands under mysterious circumstances that polite society chose not to question, and inherited enough wealth to live comfortably for 3 lifetimes. Yet comfort had never been her goal. Control was what she craved, and for the past 6 years, she had exercised that control over her orphan niece with the precision of a surgeon and the mercy of a guillotine. Sophia was 19 now, though the haunted look in her amber eyes made her seem both younger and infinitely older. She had arrived at this house at 13, still wearing the black dress from her parents' funeral, still believing that family meant safety. Her mother had been Constance's younger sister, the beautiful one, the talented one, the one who had escaped their suffocating childhood home by marrying a kind man and moving to Seattle. Sophia's father had been a music professor, her mother a violinist with the Seattle Symphony. They had filled their modest home with laughter and melodies and unconditional love. Then a drunk driver had stolen all of that on a rainy Tuesday evening, and Sophia had been shipped across the country to live with an aunt she had met exactly twice in her entire life. The terms of Sophia's parents' will had been clear. Constance would serve as guardian until Sophia turned 21, at which point a modest trust fund would be released to her. The trust wasn't enough to make her wealthy, but it would pay for college and provide a foundation for independence. $25,000. It might as well have been $1 million to Sophia, because it represented freedom, escape, survival. All she had to do was endure 2 more years under this roof. 730 days. She counted them obsessively, marking each one off on a hidden calendar in her closet like a prisoner scratching tallies on a cell wall. Constance took a delicate sip of wine and set the glass down with calculated precision. She dabbed at her thin lips with a linen napkin, leaving a faint smear of crimson lipstick on the white fabric. Her steel-gray eyes fixed on Sophia with the warmth of a cobra sizing up a mouse. "You haven't touched your dinner," Constance observed. Her voice was cultured, refined, the kind of accent that came from expensive boarding schools and deliberate elocution lessons. "Do you find it unappetizing? Perhaps the cook should be informed that her efforts are wasted on you." "The food is fine," Sophia said quietly. "I'm just not very hungry." "Not very hungry." Constance repeated the words as if they were obscene. "How curious. Most girls your age have ravenous appetites. But then, most girls your age contribute something to the households they inhabit. They work, they earn, they justify the resources expended on them. You, however, seem content to take up space and consume oxygen while offering nothing in return." Sophia's jaw tightened. She had heard variations of this speech 1,000 times. In the beginning, she had tried to defend herself, to point out that she cleaned the entire house every day, that she did all the grocery shopping and cooking, that she tended the elaborate garden and ran every errand Constance deemed beneath her own dignity. But Constance didn't want acknowledgement of these tasks. She wanted submission, wanted to see Sophia broken and grateful for whatever scraps of tolerance she received. "I could help more," Sophia offered, though she knew it was useless. "If there's something specific you need done, I'm happy to do it." "Something specific?" Constance's laugh was like ice cracking. "How generous of you to offer. Tell me, child, do you know what your parents left you besides that pathetic little trust fund?" Sophia's throat constricted. Constance knew exactly what buttons to push, which wounds to probe. "Yes," she whispered. Speak up. I can barely hear you. What did they leave you? A violin, Sophia said, louder now. My mother's violin. Ah, yes. The violin. Constance stood and walked to the antique sideboard where a black case rested among the silver serving pieces. She ran one manicured finger along its edge. Your mother's precious guarnery. Do you know what an instrument like this is worth? Sophia knew. The violin was from 1735, crafted by the legendary Giuseppe Guarneri del Gassù. It had been in her mother's family for 4 generations, passed down from one musician to the next. Its value was somewhere north of $2 million, but its true worth couldn't be measured in money. It was the last physical connection Sophia had to her mother, to the sound of her playing, to the nights when her parents would perform duets in their living room while Sophia curled up on the couch and let the music wash over her like a benediction. It's not for sale, Sophia said, her voice harder now. Nothing is for sale until someone decides to sell it. Constance lifted the case and carried it back to the table. She set it down in front of Sophia with deliberate care. You know, I've been thinking about our arrangement. You live under my roof, you eat my food, you wear clothes purchased with my money. And what do you provide in exchange? Housework that any maid could do for minimum wage. It hardly seems equitable. I'll be gone in 2 years, Sophia said. When I turn 21, I'll take my trust fund and leave. You'll never have to see me again. 2 years. Constance settled back into her chair. 730 days of supporting a girl who contributes nothing of value. Do you know what I think would be fair? I think you should earn your keep in a manner befitting your breeding. Your mother was a talented musician. Surely she passed some small measure of that talent to you. Sophia's hands clenched in her lap. She knew where this was going. It was a familiar torture, one Constance had perfected over the years. I think you should play for your supper, Constance continued. Her smile was razor thin. Every evening, before you're permitted to eat, you will perform for me. If your playing is adequate, you may dine. If it fails to meet my standards, well, I'm sure you can. Survive on whatever scraps the cook might spare you. After all, you did say you weren't very hungry. The cruelty was breathtaking in its casual efficiency. Constance knew that Sophia had avoided playing the violin for 6 years. The instrument was too painful to touch, too laden with memories of her parents, too much a reminder of everything she had lost. It sat in its case like a beautiful corpse, occasionally taken out and cleaned but never played, never allowed to sing. To force Sophia to perform was to force her to rip open wounds that had never properly healed. I can't, Sophia whispered. Please don't make me do this. Can't or won't. There's a significant difference. You're quite capable of playing. I've seen your mother's old performance videos. The talent is genetic, I'm sure. You simply choose not to, and that, my dear, is pure selfishness. If you possess a gift, you have an obligation to share it, especially when you're living on someone else's charity. Sophia looked at the violin case. Her hands trembled. She hadn't played since the funeral. Her parents had been buried on a gray October morning, and afterward, everyone had gathered at their house. Someone had suggested that Sophia play something in their memory. She had been 13 years old, numb with grief, moving through the world like a ghost. She had taken out her own small violin, the student instrument her father had bought her for her 10th birthday, and she had tried to play the Meditation from Face, her mother's favorite piece. She had made it through 4 measures before breaking down completely, collapsing on the floor in sobs so violent she thought they might tear her apart from the inside. She had never picked up a violin again. Well? Constance prompted. Are you going to play, or are you going to bed hungry? The choice is entirely yours. I'm simply providing you with an opportunity to demonstrate gratitude for all I've done for you. Sophia reached for the case with shaking hands. She opened it slowly, revealing the instrument inside. The Guarneri was breathtakingly beautiful, its varnish a deep amber red that seemed to glow with inner fire. The wood had aged for nearly 3 centuries, every scratch and mark a testament to the countless musicians who had drawn music from its strings. Sophia's mother had loved this violin with a passion that bordered on reverence. She had practiced 6 hours every day, her fingers flying across the fingerboard, her bow arm moving with the grace of a dancer. When she played, the world stopped to listen. Sophia lifted the violin from its velvet bed. It felt heavier than she remembered, or perhaps she had simply grown weaker under Constance's roof. She positioned it under her chin, feeling the familiar curve of the chin rest, the cool wood against her neck. She picked up the bow, tested its weight, felt the horsehair against her thumb. Constance watched with the detached interest of a scientist observing a laboratory rat. "Do proceed. I'm quite curious to hear what 6 years of neglect have done to your abilities." Sophia closed her eyes. She drew the bow across the strings, producing a single note. It was tentative, uncertain, but it was sound. She played a scale, then another. Her fingers remembered the positions even as her heart resisted the act of remembering. Then, before she could talk herself out of it, she began to play the meditation from face. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The piece she had failed to finish at the funeral. The piece her mother had played at her wedding, at Sophia's christening, at every important moment of their lives together. The melody poured out of the guarneri like liquid gold. Sophia's technique was rusty, her vibrato unsteady, her bow control imperfect. But the emotion was there, raw and undeniable. Every note carried the weight of 6 years of suppressed grief, of loneliness and longing and love that had nowhere to go. She played through tears that blurred her vision, through a throat so tight she could barely breathe, through pain that felt like it might consume her entirely. When she finished, the last note hung in the air like a question with no answer. Sophia lowered the violin and opened her eyes. Constance sat motionless, her expression unchanged. "Technically adequate," Constance pronounced. "Though your intonation in the upper register leaves much to be desired. Still, I suppose it's sufficient to justify a meal. You may eat." Sophia carefully placed the violin back in its case. Her hands still shook. Every part of her body felt bruised, as if she had been beaten rather than performed. She looked at the cold food on her plate and felt her stomach rebel at the thought of eating anything. "I'm not hungry anymore," she said quietly. "Suit yourself." Constance stood and collected her wine glass. "The same arrangement will apply tomorrow evening. And the evening after that. Consider it rent for your continued occupancy of my home. If you choose not to perform, you choose not to eat. The consequences are yours to bear." Constance glided out of the dining room, leaving Sophia alone with the untouched dinner and the violin that had just been weaponized against her. Sophia sat in the silence for a long time, staring at nothing, feeling everything. Finally, she stood and carried the violin case up to her small bedroom on the 3rd floor. It was the only space in the house that was truly hers, a converted servant's room with slanted ceilings and a single window that overlooked the garden. The furniture was sparse, the walls bare except for a single photograph of her parents on their wedding day, smiling at each other with a joy so pure it hurt to look at. Sophia set the violin case on her narrow bed and walked to the window. Boston sprawled below her, thousands of lights marking thousands of lives being lived in ways she could only imagine. Somewhere out there, people were happy. Somewhere out there, people were free. But not here. Not for her. Not yet. She pulled out her hidden calendar and marked off another day. 729 to go. The next evening arrived with the inevitability of a death sentence. Sophia spent the day in a fog of dread, going through her usual routine of cleaning and cooking while her mind circled the same awful truth. She would have to play again. And again. And again. Every single night for the next 2 years unless Constance grew bored with her new form of torture or Sophia found some way to escape. Escape. The word taunted her. She had no money of her own, no family besides Constance, no friends who could help her. The few acquaintances she had made in the neighborhood had been carefully discouraged by her aunt, who seemed to view Sophia's social isolation as a necessary component of proper control. Sophia had completed high school through online courses, had never been allowed to attend college despite her excellent grades, had never been permitted to work or volunteer or do anything that might give her independence. Constance had built an invisible prison, and Sophia was its only inmate. At 6 o'clock, Constance summoned her to the dining room. The ritual was the same. Fine china, crystal glasses, expensive wine that Sophia wasn't allowed to touch. A meal prepared by the cook who came 3 times a week and never spoke to Sophia beyond the most basic instructions. Constance sat at the head of the table, waited for Sophia to take her seat, then gestured to the violin case that Sophia had already brought down from her room. "Tonight, I thought we might have a guest," Constance announced. She dabbed at her lips with her napkin, leaving another crimson stain. "My dear friend Margaret Winthrop will be joining us. She should arrive shortly. I've told her all about your evening performances. She's quite eager to hear you play." Sophia's stomach dropped. It was one thing to be humiliated privately, another entirely to have her pain put on display for Constance's friends. Margaret Winthrop was a fixture of Boston society, a woman who collected gossip the way some people collected stamps. Whatever happened tonight would be discussed at every charity luncheon and garden party for the next month. "I'd rather not play for guests," Sophia said carefully. "Could I perhaps perform for you later, after dinner?" "How peculiar." Constance's eyebrows arched in mock surprise. "I was under the impression that musicians enjoyed performing for audiences. Isn't that the entire point of developing a skill, to share it with others? Unless, of course, you're ashamed of your abilities." "Are you ashamed, Sophia?" Before Sophia could answer, the doorbell rang. Constance smiled with genuine pleasure, a rare expression that made her look almost human. "That will be Margaret. Do try to make a good impression, dear. I've spoken so highly of your musical talents." The housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, showed Margaret Winthrop into the dining room. Margaret was a woman in her 60s with expertly dyed blonde hair and a face tight from multiple surgeries. She wore a designer dress and enough jewelry to fund a small country's economy. Her eyes swept over Sophia with barely concealed disdain before she turned her full attention to Constance. "Darling," Margaret cooed, kissing the air beside Constance's cheeks. "How wonderful to see you. And this must be your poor orphan niece. The one who plays violin." "Sophia," Constance corrected. "Though I suppose orphan niece is technically accurate." "Sophia, say hello to Mrs. Winthrop." "Hello," Sophia managed. "It's nice to meet you." Margaret settled into a chair and accepted a glass of wine from Mrs. Chen. "I understand you'll be performing for us this evening." "How delightful. I haven't attended a private concert in ages. What will you be playing?" Sophia looked at Constance, hoping for some hint of mercy, some sign that this torture could be avoided. But Constance's smile was serene, implacable. She was enjoying this. "The meditation from Face," Sophia said quietly. "By Massenet." "Oh, how lovely." Margaret clapped her hands together. "So romantic, so moving. I'm sure it will be wonderful." Sophia opened the violin case and lifted out the Guarneri. Her hands were steadier tonight, hardened by yesterday's ordeal. She positioned the instrument, took a breath, and began to play. This time, she tried to empty herself of emotion, to make the performance mechanical, technical, nothing more than an exercise in muscle memory. But the violin wouldn't allow it. The Guarneri had spent centuries giving voice to human feeling, and it demanded authenticity from whoever held it. As Sophia played, the melody pulled emotion from her like a magnet drawing iron filings. Grief, loneliness, desperation, a wild yearning for something she couldn't name. When she finished, Margaret dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "My dear, that was absolutely devastating. Such passion, such depth of feeling. You could have a real career with talent like that." Constance's smile faltered almost imperceptibly. She hadn't expected praise. She had expected Margaret to find some flaw, to join in the subtle mockery. But Margaret, for all her superficiality, genuinely loved music and recognized true talent when she heard it. Sophia is still quite young, Constance said smoothly. And rather undisciplined. I'm working to correct certain technical deficiencies before considering any sort of professional development. Deficiencies? Margaret looked genuinely confused. Constance, the girl plays like an angel. What deficiencies could you possibly mean? There's always room for improvement. Constance's voice had an edge now. And Sophia has certain emotional problems that make her unreliable. Playing well once or twice doesn't constitute readiness for professional performance. Sophia carefully returned the violin to its case, her mind racing. She had never heard Constance praise her for anything, but she hadn't expected the depth of resentment that now radiated from her aunt. Margaret's genuine admiration had disrupted whatever script Constance had prepared for the evening, and Constance was scrambling to regain control of the narrative. Margaret, however, wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. You know, my nephew Adrian is hosting a charity gala next week at the Harrison estate. He's always looking for talented musicians to provide entertainment. I'm sure he would be thrilled to have someone of Sophia's caliber perform. It would be a wonderful opportunity for her. The charity gala. Constance's face was a mask now, pleasant and empty. How thoughtful of you to think of Sophia. However, I'm not certain she's ready for such a public venue. Nonsense. Margaret waved away the objection. The girl is brilliant. Adrian pays his performers quite handsomely too. $5,000 for an hour of music. It would be excellent exposure for her. $5,000. The number hit Sophia like an electric shock. That was more money than she had ever possessed at one time. That was plane tickets, security deposits, the beginning of escape. She kept her expression neutral, but her heart hammered against her ribs. That's very generous, Sophia said carefully. I would be honored to perform. Constance's fingers tightened around her wine glass. The decision isn't yours to make, dear. You're still under my guardianship, which means I decide what opportunities are appropriate for you. Margaret looked between them, sensing tension but not quite understanding its source. Well, naturally you would accompany her, Constance. It's not as though she would attend alone. And it's for charity, after all. The Thornton Foundation raises money for children's hospitals. Very respectable, very appropriate. Constance was trapped. To refuse now would require an explanation, would reveal the true nature of her relationship with Sophia to someone who could spread that truth throughout their entire social circle. She took a delicate sip of wine and nodded slowly. I suppose it could be arranged. Sophia would need appropriate attire, of course. And supervision. But yes, if Adrian is truly in need of a performer, we could make ourselves available. Wonderful. Margaret pulled out her phone. I'll text him right now and let him know. He'll be so pleased. As Margaret typed on her phone, Constance caught Sophia's eye. The look she gave her niece was pure poison. You will embarrass me at this event, that look said, and there will be consequences. Sophia looked away, her mind already racing ahead. $5,000. One performance. It wasn't enough to live on for long, but it was a start. It was possibility crystallized into currency. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of small talk and forced smiles. Margaret chattered about Boston society gossip while Constance responded with calculated charm. Sophia sat quietly, barely touching her food, already thinking about what she would play at the gala. Not the meditation. Something else. Something that would showcase her abilities, that would make Adrian Thornton and everyone at that gala remember her name. When Margaret finally left, Constance turned to Sophia with cold fury in her eyes. That display of talent was unnecessary. You deliberately tried to make yourself look good in front of Margaret. I played what you told me to play, Sophia said. I did exactly what you demanded. Don't be clever with me. Constance's voice was low and dangerous. You're going to perform at that gala, and you're going to be adequate but forgettable. You will not shine. You will not network. You will not do anything to draw attention to yourself beyond the most basic fulfillment of your obligations. And the money you earn will be given to me as reimbursement for the years I've supported you. Is that understood? Sophia met her aunt's gaze. For the first time in 6 years, she didn't look away. That money is mine. I earned it. And I'm keeping it. The slap came so fast Sophia barely saw it. Constance's palm connected with her cheek with enough force to snap her head to the side. The sound echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. You will do as you're told, Constance hissed. Or I will make your remaining time in this house so unbearable that you'll beg for the privilege of giving me that money. Sophia touched her burning cheek. Her eyes watered but she refused to cry. She picked up the violin case and walked out of the dining room without another word. Behind her, she heard Constance pour herself another glass of wine, the crystal decanter clinking against the glass. In her small room, Sophia locked the door and sat on her bed. Her face throbbed where Constance had struck her. It wasn't the first time her aunt had hit her, but it was the first time Sophia had deliberately provoked it. Something had changed tonight. The praise from Margaret, the possibility of the gala, the promise of $5,000 that could change everything. For 6 years, Sophia had survived by making herself small, invisible, compliant. But compliance hadn't protected her. It had only made her a more convenient victim. She opened the violin case and looked at the guarneri. In the dim light of her room, the instrument seemed to glow with an inner fire. Her mother had once told her that great violins had souls, that they absorbed something from every musician who played them, every piece of music they gave voice to. If that was true, then this violin carried the soul of 4 generations of musicians, all the way back to the man who had crafted it with his own hands nearly 300 years ago. Sophia lifted the violin and began to play. Not for Constance. Not for dinner. Just for herself, for the first time in 6 years. She played scales and exercises, retraining muscle memory that had atrophied from disuse. Her fingers were clumsy at first, missing positions, pressing too hard or too soft. But gradually, as midnight approached and then passed, the old skills returned. The bow moved with increasing confidence. The notes rang true and clear. And Sophia felt something she hadn't felt since her parents died. She felt like herself again. She played until 3 in the morning, until her fingers cramped and her shoulder ached and she could barely stand. Then she carefully returned the violin to its case and collapsed onto her bed. 728 days until she turned 21. But maybe, just maybe, she had found a way to shorten that sentence. The week before the gala passed in a strange suspension of time. Constance barely spoke to Sophia except to issue curt instructions about household tasks. The nightly performances continued, but now Constance invited no guests and offered no commentary beyond the occasional criticism of Sophia's technique. The silence was almost worse than the act of cruelty. It felt like the calm before a storm, like Constance was planning something terrible and simply biding her time. Sophia practiced obsessively in her room. She had decided to perform Sarasate's Zigeunerweisen, a virtuosic showpiece that would demonstrate both technical skill and emotional depth. It was a difficult choice, a piece that could either make her look brilliant or expose her limitations. But Sophia was tired of playing it safe, tired of making herself small. If she was going to perform for an audience that included wealthy potential patrons, she needed to be memorable. 3 days before the gala, Constance took Sophia shopping for an appropriate dress. They went to an exclusive boutique on Newbury Street where prices weren't displayed because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. The saleswoman fawned over Constance while eyeing Sophia with barely disguised curiosity. Constance selected 3 dresses, all of them conservative to the point of dowdiness, all of them in colors that washed out Sophia's complexion. "These will do," Constance announced, not bothering to ask Sophia's opinion. "Something modest and appropriate. We're not trying to attract attention." But Sophia did something she had never done before. She walked to a different section of the store and pulled out a dress that made her breath catch. It was deep emerald green, simple and elegant, with a fitted bodice and a flowing skirt that would move beautifully while she performed. The neckline was modest but sophisticated. It was a dress that would make her look like a musician, not a child playing dress-up in her aunt's cast-offs. "I'd like to try this one," Sophia said. Constance turned and assessed the dress with narrowed eyes. "Absolutely not. It's far too mature for you. You'll wear one of the dresses I selected." The saleswoman cleared her throat delicately. "If I may, the green would be stunning with the young lady's coloring. And it's actually more affordable than the options you've chosen. It's from our contemporary collection rather than couture." The mention of a lower price seemed to mollify Constance slightly. She walked over and examined the dress more closely. "Fine. Try it on. But if it's inappropriate in any way, you'll wear what I've chosen." Sophia took the dress into the fitting room. When she emerged, even Constance fell silent. The dress transformed her. It brought out the amber flecks in her eyes, complemented her dark hair, made her look confident and capable and beautiful. She looked like her mother had looked in the photographs from her professional performances. She looked like someone who belonged on a stage. "It will do," Constance said finally. Her voice was tight. "At least you won't embarrass me completely." They left the boutique with the green dress and nothing else. On the drive home, Constance stared out the window and said, conversationally, "I've been thinking about your trust fund." Sophia's hands clenched in her lap. "What about it?" "It's a modest sum, really. 25,000. Barely enough to live on for a year, certainly not enough for both college and living expenses. You'll need to find work immediately, of course. And housing. The rental market in Boston is quite expensive." "I'll manage," Sophia said. "Will you?" Constance turned to look at her. "You have no job experience, no references, no connections. You've never lived on your own. You don't even have a driver's license. The real world is quite harsh for young women without resources or family support." Sophia understood what Constance was doing. She was trying to sow doubt, to make Sophia feel helpless and dependent. But instead of feeling afraid, Sophia felt a cold anger solidifying in her chest. "I'll figure it out," she said firmly. "I have 725 days to prepare." Constance smiled thinly. "Such confidence. I hope reality doesn't disappoint you too severely." They didn't speak for the rest of the drive home. When they arrived, Sophia carried the dress to her room and hung it carefully in her closet. She stood looking at it for a long time, imagining herself on stage at the Harrison estate, playing for an audience that didn't include Constance, earning money that belonged to her alone. It felt like looking at a door that might finally swing open, revealing a path to somewhere else. Somewhere better. Somewhere free. The night of the gala arrived cold and clear. Sophia dressed in her room, taking care with her appearance for the first time in years. She wore minimal makeup, let her dark hair fall loose around her shoulders, and stepped into the green dress that made her feel like a different person entirely. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The girl looking back at her wasn't invisible anymore. Constance appeared in the doorway without knocking. She wore a severe black gown and her usual expression of chronic dissatisfaction. "You look acceptable," she said, which from Constance was almost a compliment. "Remember what I told you. Perform adequately but not brilliantly. Speak to no one unless spoken to first. Accept your payment and give it to me immediately. Do not embarrass me." "I won't embarrass you," Sophia said. "But the money is mine." Constance's eyes flashed with anger. "We'll discuss that later. The car is waiting." They rode to the Harrison estate in hostile silence. The estate was in Winchester, about a 30-minute drive from Beacon Hill. It was one of those sprawling properties that dated back to the Gilded Age, all stone and stained glass and manicured gardens. Tonight it blazed with lights, and luxury cars lined the circular driveway. Sophia could hear music drifting from inside, the murmur of cultured voices, the clink of champagne glasses. Her stomach twisted with nerves. She had never performed for an audience this large, this wealthy, this important. But when she stepped out of the car with the violin case in her hand, she felt something unexpected. Not fear. Excitement. This was her chance to be seen, to be heard, to matter to people who weren't Constance. A young man in an expensive suit met them at the door. He had kind eyes and a warm smile. "You must be Sophia Hartwell." "I'm Adrian Thornton. Thank you so much for agreeing to perform tonight. My Aunt Margaret couldn't stop talking about your talent." "It's an honor to be here," Sophia said. "Thank you for the opportunity." Adrian's gaze lingered on her for just a moment longer than strictly necessary. His smile widened. "The honor is ours. I promise you'll have a very appreciative audience. Come with me and I'll show you where you'll be performing." He led them through the mansion to a grand ballroom where about 200 people mingled beneath crystal chandeliers. A stage had been set up at one end, with professional lighting and a sound system. This wasn't just a casual charity event. This was serious. Sophia felt her excitement spike higher. "You'll perform in about 30 minutes, Adrian explained. "I'll introduce you, and then the stage is yours for as long as you'd like. An hour is standard, but if you want to play longer, please do. And afterward, I'd love for you to join us for dinner. We're honoring some major donors tonight, and I think they'd enjoy meeting you." Constance inserted herself smoothly between Adrian and Sophia. "How thoughtful, but I'm afraid Sophia has other commitments this evening. She'll perform and then we must be on our way." Adrian looked disappointed but nodded politely. "Of course. Well, at the very least, please let me show you both to the green room where Sophia can prepare." He led them to a smaller room off the ballroom, furnished with comfortable chairs and a mirror. Sophia opened her violin case and checked the instrument, tightening the bow, testing the tuning. Her hands were steady. The nerves had transformed into focus, into purpose. Constance waited until Adrian had left before hissing at Sophia. "Remember what I said. Do not try to make connections with these people. You're here to perform and nothing more." Sophia didn't respond. She was already somewhere else in her mind, already hearing the opening notes of Zigeunerweisen, already feeling the bow in her hand and the violin under her chin. Constance could threaten and control and manipulate, but she couldn't touch Sophia when she was playing. Music was the one place Constance had no power. 25 minutes later, Adrian returned. "You're on. Break a leg." Sophia followed him to the stage. The ballroom fell quiet as Adrian stepped up to the microphone. "Good evening, everyone. Before we continue with tonight's festivities, I have a very special treat for you. Sophia Hartwell is a remarkably talented young violinist, and she's generously agreed to perform for us tonight. Please join me in welcoming her to the stage." Applause rippled through the room as Sophia walked to the center of the stage. She positioned herself in the spotlight, lifted the violin, and looked out at the sea of faces. She found Constance standing at the back of the room, her expression cold and warning. Sophia looked away. Then she closed her eyes, raised her bow, and began to play. The first notes of Zigeunerweisen swept through the ballroom like a whispered secret, delicate and haunting. Sophia's bow moved across the strings with deliberate slowness, drawing out the melody's melancholy introduction. She kept her eyes closed, blocking out the audience, blocking out Constance's disapproving presence, blocking out everything except the music flowing through her fingers. The Guarneri responded to her touch as if it had been waiting 6 years for this moment, its 300-year-old voice singing with crystalline clarity. The piece transformed from introspective to passionate without warning. Sophia's bow arm accelerated, her fingers flying across the fingerboard in a cascade of notes that demanded virtuosic precision. This was the technical showcase, the section that separated talented amateurs from true musicians. Her left hand executed rapid position changes, double stops, and harmonics that would have been impossible for most players. But Sophia had spent the past week practicing until her fingers bled, until every movement was burned into her muscle memory. The pain had been worth it. Every note rang true and clear. The audience had fallen into complete silence. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving, frozen in place by the spell Sophia was weaving. She transitioned into the famous pizzicato section, plucking the strings with her right hand while simultaneously bowing with impossible speed. It was a trick that looked effortless but required years of practice to execute cleanly. Sophia made it look like breathing. Then came the final section, where technical brilliance merged with raw emotional expression. Sophia poured everything into these last moments. Every lonely night in her small bedroom. Every humiliation at Constance's hands. Every memory of her parents that she had locked away because the pain of remembering was too intense. The violin became an extension of her grief, her anger, her desperate hunger for freedom. The notes soared and plunged, whispered and screamed, until finally reaching the triumphant conclusion that left her bow arm trembling with exhaustion. She held the final note until it faded into absolute silence. Then she lowered the violin and opened her eyes. The ballroom exploded with applause. It wasn't the polite appreciation Sophia had expected. It was thunderous, genuine, the kind of ovation usually reserved for world-class performers at major concert halls. People were standing, some were wiping tears from their eyes, and Adrian Thornton was leading the applause from the front row with an expression of absolute amazement on his face. Sophia felt lightheaded. She had performed well, she knew that, but this reaction was beyond anything she had imagined. She bowed deeply, feeling the green dress swirl around her legs, feeling for the first time in her life what it meant to be truly seen. Not as an orphan or a burden or Constance's disappointing niece, but as a musician. As herself. Adrian bounded onto the stage, his face flushed with enthusiasm. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced into the microphone, "I think we can all agree that was absolutely extraordinary. Sophia Hartwell, everyone." Another wave of applause washed over her. Sophia caught sight of Constance at the back of the room. Her aunt's face was pale, her mouth set in a tight line. She looked like she had just witnessed something catastrophic, which in a way, she had. Sophia had disobeyed her explicit instructions. She had been brilliant instead of adequate. She had drawn attention to herself in the most spectacular way possible. "Please," Adrian was saying, "stay for dinner. I insist. We'd be honored to have you join us." Sophia glanced at Constance, who was already making her way toward the stage with purposeful strides. Before her aunt could reach her and refuse on her behalf, Sophia made a split-second decision that surprised even herself. "I would love to stay," she said clearly, her voice carrying through the microphone. "Thank you so much for the invitation." Constance arrived at the edge of the stage just as Sophia was being ushered toward the dining area by Adrian and several enthusiastic audience members who wanted to congratulate her. Her aunt's hand shot out and gripped Sophia's arm with bruising force. "A word," Constance hissed through a frozen smile. "Now." Sophia allowed herself to be pulled aside into a quiet corner. Constance's eyes blazed with fury barely contained beneath a veneer of civility. "What do you think you're doing?" Her voice was low and venomous. "I told you explicitly what was expected tonight. You deliberately defied me." "I performed to the best of my ability," Sophia said calmly. "Isn't that what you wanted? Don't play games with me. You were supposed to be forgettable. Instead, you've made yourself the center of attention. And now you're accepting dinner invitations without my permission? I'm 19 years old. I don't need your permission to accept a dinner invitation." Constance's grip tightened until Sophia had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. "You're coming home with me right now, or there will be consequences you cannot imagine." "Let go of my arm," Sophia said. Her voice remained steady despite the pain. "You're hurting me. I'll do far worse than hurt you if you continue this rebellion." Constance leaned closer, her breath sharp with wine. "That money you think you're going to collect belongs to me. And when we get home, you're going to hand over that violin as well. You've proven you can't be trusted with it." The threat to take the Guarneri hit Sophia like a physical blow. The violin was the only thing she owned that had real value, the only connection to her mother that couldn't be stolen by time or grief. But even as fear spiked through her, Sophia realized something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't the same girl who had arrived at this gala. That girl would have submitted, would have followed Constance meekly to the car and accepted whatever punishment awaited her at home. But the woman who had just commanded a room full of Boston's elite with nothing but a violin and her own talent was done being controlled. "No," Sophia said quietly. "I'm not leaving, and you're not taking my violin." Constance's hand rose as if to slap her, but they were too exposed here, too many people milling nearby who might witness such a scene. She lowered her hand slowly, her face contorted with rage. "You're making a terrible mistake," she said. "When you come crawling back, and you will, I promise you'll regret this moment for the rest of your miserable life." "Then I'll regret it," Sophia said. "But I'm staying." Constance stared at her for a long moment, then turned on her heel and stalked toward the exit. Sophia watched her go, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. She had just severed the only safety net she had, meager as it was. She had nowhere to go, no money beyond the $5,000 she would earn tonight, and no plan beyond refusing to return to that house of horrors in Beacon Hill. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt exhilarated. Adrian appeared at her elbow, concern creasing his forehead. "Is everything all right? I saw your aunt leaving." She looked upset. "Family disagreement," Sophia said, managing a smile. "Nothing serious." He studied her for a moment, clearly sensing there was more to the story but too polite to press. "Well, if you're sure everything's fine, let me introduce you to some people who were absolutely mesmerized by your performance." For the next 2 hours, Sophia moved through the dinner reception in a daze. Adrian introduced her to dozens of people whose names blurred together in her overwhelmed mind. Philanthropists, business executives, academics, artists. They all wanted to know where she had studied, who her teachers were, when her next performance would be. Sophia answered as honestly as she could without revealing the full ugly truth of her circumstances. She had been homeschooled. She had learned primarily from her mother. This was her first public performance in years. One woman, a silver-haired patron of the arts named Eleanor Blackwood, took particular interest. "I run a small foundation that supports emerging classical musicians," she explained. "We provide grants, arrange performance opportunities, connect young artists with mentors. You're exactly the kind of talent we look for. Would you be interested in meeting with me to discuss possibilities?" Sophia felt tears prick her eyes. "Yes," she said. "Absolutely yes. I would be incredibly grateful for any opportunity." Eleanor handed her a business card. "Call my office Monday morning. We'll set up a proper meeting." And Sophia? That performance tonight was special. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. As the evening progressed and the crowd began to thin, Adrian found Sophia standing alone near the French doors that opened onto a terrace. She was gazing out at the illuminated gardens, the violin case clutched in her hand like a lifeline. "Quite a night," Adrian said, coming to stand beside her. "You've made quite an impression. I've already had 3 people ask me how they can book you for their events." Sophia turned to look at him properly for the first time. Adrian Thornton was probably in his early 30s, tall and lean with sandy brown hair and blue eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He wore his wealth casually, without the ostentatious display that characterized so many of Boston's elite. There was something genuine about him, something kind that reminded Sophia achingly of her father. "I'm glad I could contribute to your fundraiser," she said. "And thank you for the opportunity. It meant more to me than you could possibly know." "I have a feeling there's a story there," Adrian said gently. "But I won't pry. However, I do want to make sure you get home safely. Can I arrange a car for you?" The question hung in the air between them. Sophia's mind raced. She couldn't go back to Constance's house, but she also couldn't tell Adrian the truth. She barely knew him, and revealing that she was essentially homeless as of this moment would make her seem unstable, unreliable, potentially a liability. She needed to project capability, not desperation. "Actually," Sophia said carefully, "I was wondering if you might know of any affordable hotels in the area." I'm in the process of relocating and haven't finalized my housing arrangements yet. Adrian's expression shifted to one of concern. You don't have a place to stay tonight? I have options, Sophia lied. I just need to make some phone calls and arrange things. It's a bit complicated. Adrian was quiet for a moment, clearly deliberating something. Then he seemed to make a decision. Look, I know we just met, and I don't want to overstep, but I have a guest house on the property that's currently vacant. It's fully furnished, completely private, has its own entrance. You're welcome to stay there tonight, no strings attached, just so you're somewhere safe while you figure out your situation. Sophia's first instinct was to refuse. Accepting charity from strangers was dangerous, and men who offered help often expected something in return. But when she looked at Adrian's face, she saw only genuine concern. No ulterior motives lurking behind his eyes, no calculation about what he might gain from her vulnerability. Are you sure? She asked. I don't want to impose. You wouldn't be imposing. The place is just sitting empty. And honestly, after that performance tonight, it's the least I can do. You raised more money for the foundation in 1 hour than we usually collect in an entire evening. People were moved, truly moved. That has real value. Sophia felt the tight knot of panic in her chest loosen slightly. One night of safety. One night to think and plan and figure out her next move. It was more than she had hoped for. Thank you, she said quietly. I accept. Just for tonight. Adrian smiled with obvious relief. Great. Let me show you the way. He led her through the gardens to a charming cottage that looked like something from a storybook. Stone walls, peaked roof, windows that glowed with warm light when Adrian flipped the switches. Inside was a cozy living area with comfortable furniture, a small kitchenette, a bathroom, and a bedroom with a 4-poster bed that looked impossibly luxurious to Sophia after years of sleeping on her narrow cot. There's food in the fridge, Adrian said, gesturing toward the kitchenette. Just basics, but help yourself to whatever you need. Fresh towels in the bathroom closet. And here's my number. He scribbled on a piece of paper and left it on the counter. If you need anything at all, call me. I'm in the main house. After Adrian left, Sophia locked the door and stood in the center of the cottage, still clutching her violin case. The events of the evening crashed over her all at once. She had defied Constance. She had performed brilliantly. She had severed her connection to the only home she had known for 6 years. She had accepted help from a wealthy stranger. She had nowhere to go and no real plan beyond surviving until morning. She should have felt terrified. Instead, she felt free. Sophia set down the violin case and walked to the bedroom. She caught sight of herself in a full-length mirror and stopped. The girl looking back at her was still wearing the green dress, still had the flush of performance adrenaline in her cheeks, still looked like someone who belonged in elegant ballrooms and garden estates. But underneath the surface, Sophia could see the truth. She was exhausted. She was alone. She was balanced on the knife's edge between triumph and disaster. She changed out of the dress and into the old clothes she had worn under it, the simple jeans and sweater that were authentically hers. Then she lay down on the impossibly soft bed and stared at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw 7 missed calls from Constance and a string of increasingly threatening text messages. The latest one read, "You have until midnight to return home, or I will report the violin as stolen and have you arrested." Sophia looked at the time. It was 11:45. She turned off her phone and closed her eyes. Constance could threaten all she wanted, but the Guarneri wasn't stolen. It had been explicitly left to Sophia in her mother's will. Constance had no legal claim to it, which was probably why she had never tried to take it before. The threats were empty, just one more attempt to control through fear. But even knowing that, Sophia couldn't quite silence the voice in her head that whispered she had made a terrible mistake. What was she going to do? She had $5,000 coming to her, but that wouldn't last long. She needed housing, food, transportation, a way to continue her musical development. She needed to somehow transform one successful performance into a sustainable life. The gap between where she was and where she needed to be felt impossibly wide. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and full of dreams where she played the violin for audiences who slowly transformed into Constance, their applause turning to criticism, their admiration curdling into contempt. She woke to bright sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the previous night flooded back, and she sat up abruptly, her heart racing. It was real. All of it had been real. Her phone showed a dozen more missed calls from Constance and several from unfamiliar numbers. There was also a text from Adrian, sent an hour ago, "Hope you slept well. I had breakfast sent over, should be outside your door. Take your time today, no rush to leave." Sophia opened the door to find a covered tray with fresh fruit, pastries, coffee, and orange juice. She brought it inside and ate mechanically, her mind already spinning through possibilities and problems. She needed to call Eleanor Blackwood on Monday. She needed to find permanent housing. She needed to open her own bank account so Adrian could transfer her payment. She needed to figure out if she could legally stay away from Constance, if her aunt could somehow force her to return. A knock on the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Sophia opened it to find Adrian standing there with an apologetic expression. "Sorry to bother you," he said. "I just wanted to check in and make sure you're all right. Also, I have your payment." He held out an envelope. $5,000 as promised. Though honestly, you earned twice that with last night's performance. Sophia took the envelope with shaking hands. "Thank you. For everything. The performance opportunity, the guest house, breakfast. You've been incredibly kind." Adrian studied her face. "Sophia, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you look like someone who's running from something. And I want you to know that if you need help, real help, I might be able to provide it. No judgment, no strings. I just believe in helping people when I can." Sophia felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. She had been holding everything together through sheer force of will, but Adrian's kindness was making it harder to maintain the facade. She blinked back tears and shook her head. "I appreciate that. I really do. But I need to figure this out on my own." "Fair enough," Adrian said. "But the offer stands. And the guest house is yours for the rest of the week if you need it. I'm traveling for business starting Tuesday, and the place would just sit empty anyway. A week. 7 days of safety to find her footing, to make plans, to transform a single successful performance into something sustainable." It was more than Sophia had any right to expect, but she was in no position to refuse. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I don't want to take advantage." "You're not." Adrian smiled. "Consider it an investment in emerging talent. Besides, my Aunt Margaret would never forgive me if I let anything happen to her new favorite musician. She called me 3 times this morning to rave about your performance." Sophia couldn't help but smile at that. Margaret Winthrop, inadvertently her rescuer. If the older woman hadn't pushed for Sophia to perform at the gala, none of this would have happened. She would still be trapped in Constance's house, playing violin for her supper, counting down the days to a freedom that felt increasingly fictional. "Thank you," Sophia said. "I accept. Just for the week. That will give me time to find something more permanent." After Adrian left, Sophia opened the envelope and counted the money. 50 crisp $100 bills. More money than she had ever held at one time. She tucked it carefully into her violin case, then sat down to make a list of everything she needed to do. Call Eleanor Blackwood. Find an apartment. Open a bank account. Buy some basic necessities since she had fled Constance's house with nothing but the clothes on her back and her violin. Maybe look into whether she could legally access her trust fund early given her circumstances. The week that followed passed in a blur of activity and anxiety. Sophia met with Eleanor Blackwood on Monday afternoon at her foundation's office in downtown Boston. Eleanor turned out to be even more impressive than their brief conversation at the gala had suggested. She had spent 40 years as a concert pianist before retiring to focus on philanthropy, and her foundation had launched the careers of dozens of successful classical musicians. "Your performance Saturday night was remarkable," Eleanor said, pouring tea in her elegant office. "But what impressed me more was the raw emotion you brought to the piece. Technical skill can be taught, but that kind of authentic feeling is rare. Tell me about your musical background." Sophia gave her an edited version of the truth. She talked about her mother, about learning violin as a child, about stopping after her parents died and only recently returning to the instrument. She didn't mention Constance by name, but she alluded to difficult family circumstances that had made it challenging to pursue music seriously. Eleanor listened with the focused attention of someone who had heard many such stories and knew how to read between the lines. When Sophia finished, the older woman set down her teacup and looked at her directly. "I'm going to be frank with you, Sophia. You have tremendous raw talent, but you're also several years behind where you should be in terms of development. If you had been studying consistently since childhood with proper teachers, entering competitions, building a performance resume, you'd be much further along in your career trajectory. That's not your fault, obviously circumstances intervened, but it does mean we need to be strategic about how we move forward." "What do you suggest?" Sophia asked. "First, you need proper training. I'd like to connect you with Viktor Sokolov. He's a violin professor at the New England Conservatory, one of the best teachers in the country. He rarely takes on new students, but I think I can convince him to hear you play. If he agrees to work with you, that would be transformative for your development. Second, you need performance experience. My foundation can arrange for you to play at smaller venues around Boston, charity events, private concerts, corporate functions. Nothing that pays significantly, but everything that builds your reputation and resume. Third, and most importantly, you need financial stability. Pursuing music seriously while also worrying about rent and food is nearly impossible. My foundation offers living stipends to our scholarship recipients. It's not a fortune, but it would cover basic expenses while you focus on your training." Sophia felt overwhelmed by the generosity being offered. This was everything she needed, everything she had been trying to figure out how to achieve on her own. But there had to be a catch. Nothing this good came without strings attached. "What would you need from me in return?" she asked carefully. "Your commitment," Eleanor said simply. "I'm offering to invest in your potential, but I need to know you're serious about this path. That means dedicated practice, working with whatever teachers I connect you with, showing up prepared for every performance opportunity. I've seen too many talented young musicians squander their gifts because they weren't willing to put in the unglamorous work. If I'm going to invest in you, I need to know you won't waste that investment." "I won't," Sophia said. "Music is all I have. All I want. I promise you I'll work harder than anyone you've ever sponsored." Eleanor smiled. "Then we have an agreement. I'll set up an audition with Viktor for next week. In the meantime, I'm approving an initial stipend of $2,000 per month, starting immediately. That should cover rent and basic living expenses while you get established." Sophia felt tears welling up again. She had cried more in the past few days than in the previous 6 years combined. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means to me." "I think I have some idea," Eleanor said gently. "I've been working with young musicians for a long time, Sophia. I recognize desperation when I see it. Whatever you're running from, I hope music gives you a safe place to land." The conversation shifted to logistics. Eleanor explained the foundation's expectations, introduced Sophia to her assistant who would coordinate the details, and made Sophia promise to stay in touch and ask for help if she needed it. By the time Sophia left the office, she had a folder full of paperwork, a check for the first month's stipend, and the beginnings of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could build a real life for herself. The rest of the week was devoted to apartment hunting. With Eleanor's stipend and her performance payment, Sophia could afford a small studio in one of Boston's less fashionable neighborhoods. She found a place in Allston, a student area near Boston University. The apartment was tiny, barely 400 square feet, with a galley kitchen and a bathroom that had seen better days. But it had good light, hardwood floors, and landlord who didn't ask too many questions. She signed the lease on Thursday and moved in on Friday with the few possessions she owned, a handful of clothes, toiletries, and her violin. Adrian had been true to his word about letting her stay in the guest house for the week. He had checked in on her daily, always friendly but never intrusive, making sure she had what she needed without making her feel like a charity case. On her last day at the estate, Sophia found him in his study reviewing documents. "I wanted to thank you before I leave," she said from the doorway. "You've been incredibly generous, and I don't know how to properly express my gratitude." Adrian looked up and smiled. "Seeing you land on your feet is thanks enough. Did you find a place?" "I did. It's small, but it's mine. I signed the lease yesterday." "That's wonderful. And the meeting with Eleanor went well?" "Better than I could have hoped. She's arranging training, performance opportunities, financial support. It's everything I need to actually pursue music seriously." Adrian stood and walked over to her. "I'm glad. You deserve good things, Sophia. Whatever you were dealing with before, whatever made you need to escape, I hope you've found a way forward now." Sophia nodded, not trusting herself to speak without crying again. Adrian reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a business card. "My personal number is on here," he said. "If you ever need anything, a reference for something, connections in the arts world, or just someone to talk to, call me." "I mean that." Sophia took the card and slipped it into her pocket. "Thank you, Adrian. For everything." She left the Harrison estate that afternoon with her few belongings packed in a bag Adrian had given her, the violin case held carefully in her arms. As the car he had arranged drove her to her new apartment in Allston, Sophia looked out at the city rolling past and felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time since her parents died, she wasn't just surviving. She was building something. Creating a life from nothing. Becoming the person she was meant to be before grief and Constance had derailed everything. The studio apartment felt cavernous after living in her small bedroom at Constance's house. Sophia spent the weekend making it feel like home. She bought second-hand furniture from a thrift store, hung curtains, stocked the tiny kitchen with basic supplies. She set up a practice area by the window where the light was best and spent hours reacquainting herself with the violin, working through scales and exercises, preparing for her audition with Viktor Sokolov. On Sunday evening, as twilight painted the walls of her apartment in shades of purple and gold, Sophia allowed herself to acknowledge how far she had come in 1 week. 7 days ago, she had been trapped in Constance's house with no foreseeable escape. Now she had her own place, financial support, a path forward with her music, and the beginnings of a network of people who believed in her potential. Her phone rang, interrupting the moment of peace. Unknown number. Sophia almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Hello? Sophia Hartwell?" The voice was male, professional, unfamiliar. "Yes, this is Sophia. My name is James Chen. I'm an attorney representing Constance Hartwell. She's asked me to contact you regarding several matters. First, she's demanding the return of property she claims you stole when you left her home. Second, she's prepared to file a formal complaint with the police if you don't return immediately and fulfill the terms of your custody arrangement. Third, she's threatening legal action to have your performance payment from the Thornton charity event seized as reimbursement for expenses she incurred on your behalf over the past 6 years. Sophia's heart hammered against her ribs. She had known Constance wouldn't let her go without a fight, but she hadn't expected her aunt to hire an attorney this quickly. "I didn't steal anything," Sophia said, forcing her voice to remain calm. "The violin belongs to me. It was left to me explicitly in my mother's will. And I'm 19 years old. I'm not required to live with her anymore." "Miss Hartwell is your legal guardian until you turn 21, Mr. Chen corrected. According to the terms of your parents' will, she retains that authority for 2 more years. If you refuse to return to her home, she can petition the court to have you declared a runaway and potentially have your trust fund frozen or redistributed. The threat hit Sophia like cold water. She hadn't known that was possible. Could Constance really take away the trust fund that represented her only long-term financial security? "I need time to think about this," Sophia said. "And I need to consult with my own attorney." "You have 48 hours, Mr. Chen said. After that, Ms. Hartwell will pursue all available legal remedies. I'll send a formal letter to the address you provided on your bank account application. Good evening." He hung up before Sophia could respond. She stood frozen in her apartment, the phone still pressed to her ear, her mind racing. How had Constance gotten her new address? The bank account was the only place she had used it. Had her aunt somehow accessed that information? Was that even legal? Sophia sank onto her second-hand couch and tried to think clearly. She needed legal advice, real legal advice from someone who wasn't working for Constance. But lawyers cost money, money she didn't have to spare. Eleanor might know someone who could help, but asking for more favors when the older woman had already given her so much felt wrong. Her hand found Adrian's business card in her pocket. He had said to call if she needed anything. But this was too much to ask, wasn't it? They barely knew each other. He had already done more than enough. Still, Sophia found herself dialing his number before she could talk herself out of it. Adrian answered on the second ring. "Sophia? Is everything all right?" The concern in his voice made something crack in Sophia's carefully maintained composure. She had been holding herself together through sheer willpower, refusing to acknowledge how terrifying and overwhelming everything was. But hearing genuine care from someone who had no obligation to care about her at all broke through her defenses. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, and was mortified to hear her voice shaking. "I know you've already done so much, but I don't know who else to call. My aunt's attorney just contacted me. She's threatening legal action, claiming she can force me to return to her house because she's still my legal guardian. I need help and I don't know where to turn." There was a brief pause, then Adrian's voice came back firm and reassuring. "Give me your address. I'm coming over. Don't respond to any more calls until I get there." "You don't have to do that. I just needed advice about finding an attorney or something." "Sophia," Adrian interrupted gently, "give me your address. You're not dealing with this alone." 20 minutes later, there was a knock on her door. Adrian stood in the hallway looking concerned and determined. He had clearly left his house in a hurry, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of his usual impeccable style. Sophia let him in, acutely aware of how small and shabby her apartment must look to someone who lived in a mansion. "Tell me everything," Adrian said, settling onto her couch. "From the beginning. What happened between you and your aunt?" So Sophia told him. Not the edited version she had given Eleanor, but the truth. All of it. Living with Constance after her parents died. The years of emotional abuse and control. The nightly performances for dinner. The public humiliation. The escalating cruelty. Her decision to defy Constance at the gala and the threat to take her violin. Her escape in the week she had spent trying to build a new life. And now this call from an attorney claiming Constance could legally force her to return. When she finished, Adrian's expression was a mixture of anger and concern. "That woman is a monster," he said flatly. "And her attorney is lying to you. Guardianship doesn't work the way he described." "Are you sure?" Sophia felt a surge of hope. Because he sounded very official and threatening. "I'm sure." Adrian pulled out his phone. "I'm going to call a friend of mine. Lauren Ross. She's a family law attorney, one of the best in Boston. She'll be able to tell us exactly what your rights are and what Constance can and can't legally do." He made the call and spent several minutes explaining the situation to someone on the other end. Sophia could only hear his side of the conversation, but she could tell from his expression that the news was good. When he hung up, he was smiling. Lauren confirmed Sophia's rights. At 19, guardianship was unenforceable. Constance had no legal claim to the violin or performance earnings. Within days, Adrian helped Sophia secure protection orders. Her audition with Viktor Sokolov exceeded expectations. He accepted her immediately, praising her raw authenticity. Months passed with intensive training and small performances building her reputation. Adrian attended every concert, their friendship deepening into something profound. Eleanor's foundation opened doors nationally. A year later, Sophia debuted at Symphony Hall. Constance sat in the back row, watching her niece triumph. Afterward, Adrian proposed backstage. Sophia said yes, finally understanding that family meant choosing those who cherished you, not enduring those who destroyed you. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.